Welcome to Keep the Flow. I'm Scott. We have a guest episode for you today that's going to cover a lot of topics: being multidisciplinary, using anxiety as a source of inspiration, AI music, to name a few. I think you're going to love this guest. He's a friend. Within the first few months of moving to Brooklyn in the late 90s, I was introduced to an interesting trumpet player who was writing his own music. It turned out we lived pretty close to each other and we started playing together regularly. After he moved back to California, he became even more prolific as a composer and has released 5 albums which have all been well received in the press. He was commissioned by the San Francisco Friends of Chamber Music and was also awarded a New Jazz Works grant by Chamber Music America. But this is no one-trick pony. He's multi-talented. Along with his gifts for music is a strong aesthetic sense visually. He leads a double life as a designer, which shows up in his brilliant album covers. My guest today is Ian Carey. Playing with you and Dan, the Dans, we played with 2 different Dans.
Yeah.
That was a growth experience for me, really, because you were writing music and trying to write for just trumpet, bass, and drums. That's very unusual to begin with.
Right.
And sort of seeing how you dealt with not having a chordal instrument and yet wanting to do things that were not just simple. It wasn't simple music. You know, you would write these harmonies between you and the bass and with voice leading and that kind of stuff. So it was inspiring.
Yeah, I got big into counterpoint in school, and so that was, I don't remember why I initially decided not to try and find somebody to play chords with us. But yeah, I mean, maybe it was just like the simplicity of just having to corral 2 other people rather than 3. And yeah, probably I didn't know that many people either, because both you and Dan had gone. I met through the same connection, the William Patterson. Yeah, so that was an interesting thing to try and like write 2-part counterpoint for trumpet and bass. And yeah, so I was definitely, looking back, I did not really know what I was doing. But it was sort of fun to just kind of try something and then play it. And yeah, and you guys were very indulgent in trying to make it work. One of the things that I remember from that time that I think sort of relates to the kind of stuff that you have talked about in the past is I remember I was, my compositional aspirations were sort of way ahead of where my instrumental technique was at the time. And I was, struggling with a lot of trumpet challenges, and it was in the middle of this, years long embouchure sort of wilderness wandering. And so yeah, so really from day to day, things would be sometimes fine, sometimes like just complete mess. And I remember one time playing with you, and it may have been the second group when we added Sean Moran on guitar. Um, and I just was not in a great headspace, I remember. And then, and you emailed me afterwards and you were like, I just think you shouldn't be so hard on yourself. I think you have a great career in front of you. So I just wish you would enjoy it. Um, which was, which was good advice, I think, but when you're in the moment, it's hard not to just kind of like, get stuck on whatever you're frustrated with or you don't think is happening, at where you want it to be. So that was something I kind of consciously started working on after that, was like, just kind of where I'm at today is where I'm at today. And what can we do with the tools available? I mean, I would try to imagine, like, if you're a piano player and you show up and someday you have an 88 key piano and some days you have a little one that's this, this many keys, and then you do your best with that. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, I that was a memorable um, word of wisdom.
But the limitations, I find that really interesting. Um, just, I mean, you had this group with just the trumpet, bass, and drums, and which I mean is also financially, it's better. You're better off. You know, in New York, it wasn't like
Well, I
there
don't
was a
know.
lot of money.
Is one third of nothing that much better than a quarter of nothing?
Well, I'm sure that's not what you were, why you were doing it that way, but I think having these limitations, it forces you to think differently.
Yeah,
I mean, sometimes you can come up with things that you wouldn't have done if you had had a chordal instrument, because you would have just had the guitar do it or the piano do it. But
right.
because you had that extra responsibility, it forced you to go into different places in the harmony.
Yeah, and
You
it
know,
was I think it was valuable, to do that so that when I later worked with kind of more traditional instrumentation, um I sort of didn't I was already not I was already trying to not treat that in a kind of business as usual way, I was already sort of looking for ways to treat a quartet or quintet or whatever more like a little mini chamber ensemble where roles were not so defined in advance, that you might have the drummer's not just going to play time the whole time, and the bass is not just going to walk, and the chordal instrument is not just going to comp. Like, I always wanted everybody to have something interesting to be doing at any given time.
but then when you moved back to the West Coast, that's when you really started putting out records. Like we never recorded the. I don't think we did we? We never
We did
like
a
went into a
demo.
studio,
No, no.
or just like recording in my apartment or something.
Right.
But when you got back to San Francisco, you started putting out records,
Right.
and but you went for larger groups. Like your first album was a quintet. Was the second one? The second one was at quintet plus one.
I did two quintet, and then I got into quintet plus one and did three, I think, or four with them. Yeah. Yeah. And there were a couple of things that happened. Had gotten into a little bit of a rut in New York. I think I was doing had an evening job after I'd gotten out of school. I got an evening job doing legal proofreading, which was really just kind of soul suckingly boring. And
You
also
don't
it was,
enjoy proofreading?
you know,
I'm sorry.
not definitely not that stuff. Not yeah, 400-page legal documents about mergers. Um, but that's the thing is that, and I think a lot of people. I mean, I knew other people who were in similar situations where they were there in New York to play music, and yet, you got to pay the rent, so you got to find something that's going to do that. And so I felt like, well, here I am in the music center of the world, but instead of going out hearing stuff all the time and playing, I'm at this stupid law office. And um, anyway, so I decided to take a break, and do a little sublet for a summertime in San Francisco, because a friend of mine had a roommate that was going to be out of town. And I had a couple of friends who were doing who were working in design. You and Suna were both doing some stuff in addition to your music stuff, and then I had another friend who was a book designer. And I was sort of thinking, like, okay, maybe that's something I could do, because my dad was a designer, and so I sort of grew up in that world. Thinking like maybe that's something I could do on the side to supplement my music, and it would be a little less depressing than the proofreading thing. And so I came out to San Francisco, and that was actually right in the midst of the .com bust, the first .com. So this was summer of 2001. And so there were a lot of, and I was like, oh, I'm sure I can find some design work out there. But I was a year or more too late for that.
Oh, wow.
But the first agency I went to said, well, we have some proofreading work. I was like, oh, okay. But they ended up placing me at this educational company, and I was in the same room as the graphic designers there, both of whom were looking to leave. When they left, it was an easy in for me to start working there as doing graphic design. So I did that for a little while, and then I got a gig at a friend of mine who was a very personable person, talked this bar into like having me come play. And initially we were just playing standards and sort of normal kind of pickup band stuff. But then I realized, like, okay, I have a steady job, and why don't I subsidize this a little bit with some of my own money and hire a bigger band, so then I can write, play the music that I had been writing and write more new music. And so one of the lucky things about this venue was that this bar had 3 owners who did not like each other. And so after they hired us, it took them over 2 years to get around to firing us, even though none of the individual owners were that, psyched about having us there. They just couldn't get it together to fire us for quite a while. And so I was able to really like develop a book of original music.
You're saying you don't think it was that they appreciated your artistry that kept them
definitely
bringing you back? The design that you do on the album covers is there's like a handmade quality to it, a lot of it. Well, the second one, the Roads and Codes, that one, it has like a comic look to it. So are you doing it by hand? Like, what is your process actually for?
So I do it in Adobe Illustrator, because that was sort of my workhorse program for my day job stuff. So I got kind of progressively better at that the more that I did it, and had been also really getting into, graphic novels and things like that. People like Dan Clowes and Adrian Tomine, yeah, and people like that. And I'm not on that level at all. Like I really admire, like they do a lot of hand drawing, or they'll do what is it, Procreate, the app. I think a lot of them use that. But yeah, so I haven't really gotten into, like, this iPad is fairly new, so I haven't yet tried creating art on it yet, but that's something I'd like to try.
One of your more recent albums was called Fire in My Head, The Anxiety Suite. Sorry. Fire in My Head, The Anxiety Suite. And it's a great album. How did you decide to use the concept of anxiety as a source of inspiration?
As I had been writing more and more in-depth stuff for that group, at that point it was the Quintet Plus One, so this would have been after Roads and Codes. I started applying for grants, and I got one from a local organization called San Francisco Friends of Chamber Music, and I was explicit that I did not want to write something programmatic in advance. Like, I didn't want to have a topic, because that was, there's a lot of that, especially in the jazz world, I think, where, there's a sense that people will write music specifically to get grants and things like that. And so it'll often, have to do with some kind of hot button social or cultural issue, or be related to, I mean, if you can think of a topic, somebody's written a jazz suite about it, And so I kind of wanted to push against that and do something that did not have a topic, but was just me wanting to like write more interesting music that was interesting to me for this band. And so I sort of said that in this grant application, and they went for it at the time. So that ended up being the album Interview Music, which was like a 4-part suite that
About it is sort of poking fun at having a topic, something that'll get you an interview, right?
right.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So, but then that ended up being coming out in 2016, which, as I look back, it was like, well, there was a lot happening in the country that maybe was not, maybe that wasn't the best time to be.
Really, I don't remember anything
above
2016. not ringing any bells.
Dude, anyway, maybe not the best time to be sort of above it all.
Oh, you mean that? I
and
remember. Never mind.
Right. So then that following year, I applied for. Every year I would apply for this Chamber Music America grant, which is kind of a New Jazz Works, which is kind of one of the biggest grants for small jazz ensemble that you can get. So anyway, so I applied for it. I had applied for it many times, and that time I actually got it. And so yeah, I was talking to my wife about it, and trying to figure out like, okay, what am I gonna write about? Because again, I felt like, I couldn't sort of justify just doing some abstract, non-topical thing. And she said, well, it seems like your anxiety has been a sort of touchstone of your life, and maybe you should think about how that um, affects your music, and use that as a kind of jumping off point. And so that was a little bit of a bridge to um, connecting with the current events, because certainly by 2017 stuff was in full swing, although it seems a little quaint now to think about how things were back in year one or whatever of
There's like pre-escalator and post-escalator, right?
yes, exactly. Yeah, well, so you know yeah, I mean, certainly. So if you look at the cover, yeah, the one of the movements was sort of about my anxiety symptoms, and how, and the kind of physical toll that would take. And one of them was called thought spirals, which is sort of about like getting into these like mental endless cycles that you can't get out of. One of them was called internal exile, that was sort of about this idea of like um, people kind of sort of hiding from the world and just focusing on your own little areas of interest. And one was called resistance, and was sort of inspired by all of the people that were kind of rising up to fight this stuff that was happening. So, oh, and yeah, one was called "This Is Fine," which was named after our favorite cartoon
Yeah.
dog. That was a useful um, uh, kind of jumping off point for me to keep in mind. I ended up writing this little anxiety motif that I had come back throughout the various pieces. It's this little thorny line. Um, and Yeah, so then that ended up being, we finished that and premiered it and recorded it in the summer of 2019. And it was scheduled to be released and have a big show in the first week of March 2020.
Perfect timing.
Which, yes, exactly. Yeah. And so what's funny is that, of course, that didn't happen because of the lockdown. And one of the reviews, especially talking about the the one called Internal Exile. It's like, did Ian Carey predict the future? So in a sense, it was very timely that was happening, but it also was, just kind of it sort of fit in that that this chaos was all happening, sort of just as I was writing
Right.
about
But
it.
then
So
also, that's exactly when more people are experiencing anxiety than at any point,
yep.
But I was going to ask, I mean, I title my pieces something, and sometimes I have a loose idea of what it means to me. But when you don't have lyrics, it's really tricky to infuse something with meaning. And I was just wondering, did you feel that friction at all?
Yeah, in a sense, but it's hard to sit down, um for me anyway. It's hard to sit down as a composer and say, like, okay, this is well, or at least I had not gone about that approach too much to that point in my life. I had not sort of say, okay, I want to write music about something. And I compare that to, say, somebody who is does film music or whatever. Like, that's what they come in with. They're not just abstractly coming up with melodies and things. They are, from the get-go, trying to fit a story, a narrative, right? And so yeah, so it was I did find that, whereas before I might just have been like, okay, well, what's the most interesting musical choice I could make right now, or what, for this direction, for this, I mean, all those little tiny decisions you have to make when you're composing something. When I knew what the overarching theme was going to be, that would often say, like, okay, well, of all of these choices, this one sounds the most anxious, so let's go with that. Although, there are parts within the piece that it's not all anxiety all the time, right? Because that wasn't how life is. Like, even just, like we were talking about, that you're aware of what's going on out in the world, but you still have your little ups and downs and joys and sorrows, and that kind of don't stop just because we're living in these interesting times. And so similarly, it was okay to kind of say, like, okay, well, this part of this piece feels more like a little pocket of peace within this bigger picture.
You got to have a pocket of peace
stress
somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah,
there would be I mean, I think I couldn't create if I was only thinking about the story the whole time, right? I had to, so there would be stretches where it's just like, okay, I'm just going to see where this piece wants to go. And I should say that, like, one of the things I really tried to got into with that band was trying to get away from just like, okay, it's a 32 bar form, and then we take solos, and then we play the out chorus, and so that I was really trying to get into development and taking things in different places, not having everybody solo on the same forms and things like that. And so, yeah, so those kind of big picture decisions could definitely be colored by, what I wanted the overall energy to be. And there's definitely, I went through a lot of iterations with them of like, okay, this piece sounds good, but it's too happy, it doesn't fit the theme, right? So having to go back in and see, like, okay, how can I make this? I mean, that had come up when I was talking to my wife about this whole thing, and she said, it seems like even your happy pieces tend to have a little bit of an anxious edge to them, whether intentionally or not. And then likewise, I found that even these pieces that I had designed to be representative of anxiety, of different aspects of anxiety, would often have those little pockets of peace, little bits of happiness kind of cropping in here and there, almost against my will. So I guess that's sort of, and then after the fact, I can say, well, that's the resilience of the human spirit, right? Or whatever.
How do you manage your ideas? Like, do you have an organized process of cataloging different ideas and then going back to that to try to use that when you compose, or is it just like you sit down and whatever comes out comes out?
Um, it's been both, depending on the situation. It was interesting that the video that you made a while back talking about handwriting, and how that was sort of a different pathway into stuff. I found that it made me think about this circus music that I had written a few months back, where just sitting at the piano with a notebook and just coming up with some stuff, and then coming over to the computer and developing a little bit, and then going back to the piano and the notebook. In a way, it just sort of, there was just a directness of that where I was able to kind of, okay, well, what's something that would work for this? Let's try this. And then being like, okay, well, that, in going down a certain path a little ways, following it, developing it, and then saying like, okay, this is getting too dark. Let's go back to the notebook and take it in a different direction. And yeah, and then there were times when I found myself coming up with something and being like, okay, this is cool, but it's not cool for this. So let's save that and check in with that later, and I wish I could say I was the kind of person that just gets up and writes every day. And I've had stretches where I've done that. But lately, I tend to be more, I need the deadline to like get me to really come up with something, whether that's a gig coming up or some other project.
Yeah, you mentioned also getting grants is another way that gives you a deadline and some pushes
Exactly.
you forward.
Yeah.
So how do you do you use a certain app or a notebook or a folder, or how do you keep track of your ideas?
Yeah, for the most part, I have just a little music notebook. Most of I would say majority of my composing happens at the piano with a notebook, and then I get it into Sibelius and start messing around with it there. And then, yeah, I do find that sometimes I can sort of write myself into a corner in Sibelius, and then going back to the notebook can kind of help clear, kind of bring a little bit of a freedom back into it. I certainly, when I was writing the most recent circus music, it was a dance of going back and forth between those two approaches.
Well, speaking of using the computer and writing music, what are your feelings about AI coming into the music creation process?
I hate it. I think it's terrible, and we should destroy it. But let me tell you how I really feel. Yeah, no, I am. My feeling is that if you want to use, an LLM to, analyze X-rays or hunt for, planets or whatever, being checked by somebody who really knows what they're doing, then that's fine. But I feel like pretty much every use of it in education, the arts, um, as it's currently deployed, is anti-creative. I feel like it's, I think I feel like the people who are really pushing it um, are just, they have a resentment of, um, I mean, this sounds like, oh, they wish they could draw or whatever, but I really do think that a, um, there's a mindset that looks on skill and craft as something for suckers, um, that like, oh, and I mean, I think of like, I knew a conceptual artist who just thought that the idea of like learning how to paint or whatever was just so prosaic and old fashioned. And, you really just need to, and I get it. That's fine. Whatever. I mean, not everybody has to be um, an expert at everything. But I think that being lousy at something and then working at it and getting better is a necessary part of the process of creating art, and and that's the thing is like you hear some of these tech bros talk about um, the creation of art or music, and they don't they just don't get the idea that we could actually enjoy struggling with something, not being able to do it and not being able to just skip to the ending. Like, well, first of all, I'm super grateful that, I mean, I have no idea how much literal work I've lost to AI as it's currently used. I mean, I know that, I mean, I've had friends come to me and say, I mean, I've heard come and say, oh, do you want to do an album cover for, our album that's coming out, which is something that I have over the years done a fair amount of as a designer. And I'll say, sure, here's a quote. And they'll say, sounds good. And then they'll come back and say, yeah, actually, the label wants to go with somebody else. I'll say, okay. And then the record comes out and it's this AI slop
Oh man.
graphic of like, just, oh my God. And, which I think in a few years, everybody's going to look at that and say like, really, I think about that John McLaughlin album that was one of those magic eye paintings. Do you remember
I
those
don't.
where you look at it and like something pops
Oh
out?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, so I have no idea really how much work I've really lost to it, but I'm grateful that it has not made it easier to learn how to play the trumpet or to improvise as a jazz musician. Like, and the fact that in my teaching life, which is another big aspect of what I do for a living, it's not useful, right? There's no so I teach ensemble classes and I do things like make them play a Charlie Parker melody in a different key every week, and AI is not going to help them do that. They're just going to have to learn it. And so when I'll be at walking around where I teach at Sonoma State, and I'll hear somebody just shedding away, as we say, like trying to learn some hard piece. And it just is inspiring to me in a way that maybe before I might not have appreciated, because it wouldn't have seemed so unusual. But it's like, in 2026, there is, to me, something heroic about saying like, I don't know how to do this. I'm going to figure it out by myself using my brain. And similarly, like I'll go and I remember, you know, um, recently going to, you know, walk around like a little outdoor art fair and seeing all these paintings that were terrible, but it's like, but these people are doing it. They're figuring it out. They're trying to learn how to do this. And I think that's awesome, So um, I'm hopeful that there will be, I mean, I feel like there's a fairly robust backlash brewing. And I think especially if the economics of it make it so it's not free for most of the users. If you suddenly have to pay, I don't know, $100 a month who knows? I mean, maybe people are just used to that now, um, but yeah, I hope that there will continue to be a market for people who want human created art and music.
Two things. I recently finished this book called Primal Intelligence by a guy, Angus Fletcher. I don't know if you've heard of him. Actually gave me a lot of hope. He kind of goes through in a very deep and scientific way why AI will never actually be creative. Like creativity is just beyond the scope of what is possible with AI. And and it really has to do with the way our brains work and the connectivity between neurons, the synapses. When we learn things and when we come up with ideas, we're constantly telling a story. We're saying because A, then B, right? But AI, like computers, can only A equals B. Like it can't make a story. It can't write a story.
Right.
It can imitate it. It can. That's basically what's going on. It's just mimicking actual creativity, and so the novelty of that will eventually die down. I mean, there's definitely going to be some disruption, but I think in the end, the human element is going to be more valuable because, like you said, people are going to look back at that album cover and cringe. I was thinking about earlier today. I was watching on YouTube. There's an ad that pops up here in Iceland. There's some Icelandic advertising company that's probably like one dude on a laptop who's just using AI to create ads, and they all kind of look the same. And the music is there's background music to them, and one of them is supposed to be kind of jazzy, and it's with a trumpet, but it sounds kind of like a real trumpet, but no human being would ever pick those notes in that order, and it is so bizarre. And also the fact that the people that put it out, there was a human being that had to hit upload on this, and like how they thought that it would be okay.
This has been a very clarifying moment in many ways. And so, you have probably, I don't know, around here, there are a lot of restaurants that have gone from, I mean, there was a while there where they would have a Spotify subscription or something. And so you would hear like some great jazz, like Ella Fitzgerald or even Eric Dolphy or whatever would be going on in the background while you're eating your steak frites or whatever. And then at some point I remember the first time I heard it, but we were in the sushi restaurant and I hear this piano trio stuff going on in the background. And it's just sort of like meandering, low energy, kind of like poor man's Bill Evans. But the more that I listen to it, I start to notice, like, as you said, like none of this makes sense. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't, harmonically. I mean, it's like there's all these random diminished chords happening, and it never ends. Like we were there for the whole hour and a half. We were there was one song.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it just got to where it was like it was driving me nuts. What's more depressing to me, or something that I've had to sort of accept and contend with, is the fact that nobody else was bothered by it at all. And probably, in fact, unless you had studied jazz, you wouldn't know that it was fake. And probably there were some people who would have considered themselves jazz fans who would have been like, oh, this is nice, because they're not really engaging. And that made me think, like, what does it say about this music that we've spent our lives trying to learn, that it can be replaced with this meaningless, what are we doing? Like, did I really need to learn how to play all this stuff? But what that made me think about was that, okay, well, that brings it back to the fact that it's not just about the end product, right? Like you said, the computer gets to the end product immediately. There is no learning, there's no developing, there's no decision making really going on.
And there's no depth.
People will say, like, well, it's getting better. Okay, whatever, that's fine. But at the root, the problem is the same, right? Which is that it's not just about the end product. It's the whole process that created it, right? It's my entire life and everything I've heard and everything I've worked on and practiced and struggled with, and all those years I couldn't play the trumpet. All of that comes out every time I play, hopefully, right? Or you or anybody else, like, you're hearing that person's life story. And if it's not there, then then it's not music, I remember reading this quote that really summed things up. And the guy, I forget who it was, but he just said, basically, I'm a hater, and I hate this, and I don't have to apologize for it. And I think we should, he said something like, I think the machine is terrible and we should break it. And that's sums up my feelings pretty well.
All right. So, just real quick to finish up, do you have any parting advice for my listeners?
The advice that I tend to give my students, and that I try to follow myself, is nothing novel. I think it's just the idea of just keeping at what you're doing, and not really learning to appreciate the process of it, and trying to not put too much weight on what the end result of it is going to be. I think that's been one of those clarifying things for me, is that working on music, working on composing, working on practicing, that's something I gotta feel like I would do that whether or not I ever had another gig, because it's meaningful to me and I enjoy it. So that said, it certainly is useful to have something coming up that you can work towards, to find little deadlines for yourself. I really liked your advice about writing things that don't mean anything, or that are very low pressure, and then you can always add meaning to it later. You can always, as one of my teachers said, quoting, I think it was a quote from Bob Brookmeyer originally, of because when I was in school, it took me a long time to kind of get over the thinking that something had to be good before I write it down, so that, like, I would write a note and be like, oh, C, like, come on. But he said, you have to put the notes on the paper, right? Like, you gotta get something out there before you can make it better, and the more that you do that, the less of a big deal it seems to be, So that's something that I am constantly trying to keep doing.
That's great. Yeah. Wise words. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I will leave links to Ian's website and his incredible music in the description. You should definitely check it out. Thanks to Ian for coming on the show, and thanks to you for hanging out. I'll catch you in the next episode. Until then. keep the flow.